Hi, ladies. Thank you so much for showing up at your gather group. It is so good to just fill our homes with women who are excited and mamas who are excited about just learning more about the Lord and knowing how to be a better Christ follower and mother to our kiddos. Well, our theme for Substance Moms this year is fully content, as you've heard, and our verse is in Matthew 6:26, that if God cares so much for the birds, how much more is he going to care for you? And Sarah, our fearless leader, opened us up in week 1 by talking about a popular passage found in Philippians chapter 4, verses 11 to 13. Now, Sarah and I had no idea, but we found out that we picked the exact same verses. So we are unpacking them in slightly different ways. So I'm just going to dive right in here. All right, Paul wrote a letter to believers in Philippi. Now, Philippi was this Roman colony, and most of the believers who were there were Gentiles, which basically means these are people who were not Jewish, who were also receiving the gospel, which meant that at that point, anybody had access. So Paul was very connected to these particular believers in Philippi because he had founded a church there during his second missionary journey. And the letters that he was writing to them are what we now know as the book of Philippians. Now, this book is an incredible source of joy and encouragement for these believers who were doing God's work. And it talks all about all kinds of great topics like living a life worthy of the gospel, or imitating Christ's humility, or putting our own confidence in Jesus and not just in ourselves. And there are a ton of passages found in Philippians that you've likely heard, you may have read before, or even memorized. And what is so mind-blowing to me is that this is one of 4 books of the Bible that Paul wrote while he was imprisoned. Well, Philippians 4, verses 11 to 13 tells us, I have learned what it is to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. Whether I'm well fed, whether I'm hungry, whether I'm living in plenty or in want, I can do this through him who is Jesus, who gives me strength. Now, we often hear that last line. It's used in a variety of situations, and it's a really powerful line. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. And historically, it's a really popular verse with Christian athletes. If you've heard of Steph Curry, right? Many people have. He writes this verse on every single pair of his basketball shoes. Or maybe you've heard of Tim Tebow. He used to write this below his eyes, those black eye stickers that players will often use during football games. He would write Philippians 4:13. Now, I remember back, it's been about 5 years now. My son Justice was 10 years old, and he was training for his very first race, which was a big one. It was a 10-mile with the Twin Cities Marathon. And we were training together, and we would get out 3 times a week to kind of train and get ready for this run. And I just want to quickly pause and just give a shout out to 6 of our Substance Moms who are running the 10-mile and full marathon for Twin Cities with Team Venture. I love y'all. So excited you're on the team. All right, going back. So I remember training with Justice. It was kind of brutal. He was young. There was this mental battle that was going on that's often associated with running, right? Because it's tough, especially when you're 10. Now, there's a lot of people who are never going to sign up for a race because just the thought of it is just so daunting. That's why we've got apps like the Couch to 5K. Now, during one of our training runs, Justice was super frustrated. He was tired and everything in his body was hurting that day. And as an adult, I just remember thinking and saying, buddy, I get it. Like, running can be so hard. Your legs can just feel like logs. Your breathing can be super off. You might get a side cramp and just feel like junk. And I was trying to encourage him, but there were times, often in the beginning, he was just getting a little defensive. And during one of our runs, I just remember that verse coming to mind, Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And I just stopped and I shared it with him. And I was just trying to encourage him with it and just repeating it over and over. Every time we'd go up a hill, every time we'd go down a hill, every time his little feet were hitting the pavement, I said, buddy, you can do this through Jesus who strengthens you. And that really resonated with him. And I might go like a half a mile without saying anything at all and just kind of run next to him, letting him know, buddy, I'm here. You got this. I'm going to stay next to you no matter what. Now, an athlete quoting the scripture, it does not necessarily imply that they believe they can win a game because Jesus is strengthening them. Like somehow Jesus is like picking sides or picking teams. And just me quoting it to my son at 10 years old, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden through a few training runs, he's going to run a sub 5-minute mile at age 10. But what it does mean is that regardless of if one wins or loses, if you have to walk or run, if you feel like a gazelle getting out there on the trail, or if you feel like a turtle, you can be content. So I want to go back to our verses in Philippians because, as quoted by She Reads Truth, Christ's strength in Paul produces something that is far richer than just achievement. It produces contentment. And just a quick plug for She Reads Truth. If you haven't heard of that platform, shereadstruth.com. It's just an incredible Bible study tool. So look that up when you finish today at your group. Well, here are some different definitions of contentment. Sarah gave some in week 1, and here are a few others. Contentment is about accepting people and things as they are and not just dwelling on how you wish things should be. It's this acceptance of things as they are, as the wise and loving providence of a God who knows what is good for us, who loves us as always to seek our good. And the last definition, which is probably my favorite, is that contentment is a sustainable happiness. It's this ongoing, everyday, through life's difficult situations, the stresses, the mountains, the valleys, that we can experience this sustainable happiness. Well, last spring, I signed up for the Twin Cities 10 Mile again, and gosh, this was probably March or April, and by mid-August, I hadn't even started training. The race was about 7 weeks out, and summer was wrapping up, school was about to start, and I had not run even once over the summer. But here I was leading a team of 30 runners for Team Venture, so obviously, I had to step it up. I had to get my body moving, and I was dreading it for some reason. Like, I knew it was important. I knew that there was some sort of mental block, though, keeping me from jumping into my training, and some major resistance that was keeping me from doing what I knew I was supposed to do and to transitioning to this new season of training and just leading my team well. Well, there's a well-known author named Stephen Pressfield, and he wrote a book called The War of Art. There's this famous quote inside of the book that I have really held on to, and it says that most of us have two lives. We've got this life that we live, and we've got this unlived life within us. And between the two stands resistance. So what is this word, resistance? In one word, if I were to describe it, it really just means opposition. It is what comes between the life that we live and this unlived life within us. And for me, that resistance that was standing between me and training was just busyness. Because I was busy, I wasn't including a training plan in my weekly rhythm. Now, in our text in Philippians, Paul's resistance was prison. Okay, sometimes we have control over our resistance, other times we don't. Now, Paul, he could have chosen to isolate. He could have chosen to just ignore the outside world and just wallow in his current situation because it was brutal. And who would have blamed him, right? This man was imprisoned, but he had been beaten, he had been ridiculed, but instead he chose to continue to encourage these believers in Philippi, and he chose to be brave. Because Paul, he truly had something to live for. He had something to say. He had a word for these believers. He wanted to spur them on, even though he wasn't physically able to be with them. And here we are thousands of years later from these words being penned, and we are still reading these words, and we are still applying them to our lives in 2024. Now, if we back up to the book of Philippians to chapter 1, there's a really powerful line in verse 28, and it says, "Be brave when you face your enemies." Now, in this case, I just want to consider resistance or this opposition our enemy. That thing that is keeping us from what we know we need, or that thing that we want to do, that thing that's keeping us from living with purpose. Now, there's always going to be resistance in our life, right? I mean, if you could look back over the years, whether it's your years of being a mother or your years when you were single or in high school, I mean, all the way back, there has been resistance. But if we could just pause for a second and think about this question right now, right here, where you are sitting. What is the resistance you are facing? What is that opposition standing in your way to living fully content? And I'm not going to say what is your resistance, because I truly believe it is not yours. If it's opposition, it is not your thing, it is that thing. What is that thing that's standing between you? We don't need to claim it as saying, my resistance is my apathy. I'm just apathetic. That's my thing. No, Apathy is that resistance. You don't have to claim it over yourself. You don't have to say, I will always be this way. It will always be this way. Maybe for you, that opposition or that resistance is slothfulness. You're like, I just am not motivated. I just feel like I know what I need to do and I just can't do it. Maybe it's anxiety. Maybe it's fear. Maybe your child has recently received a diagnosis. That's something that's out of your control, but it is just paralyzing you. Maybe it's a desperate financial situation. Regardless of what it is, to be fully content, to be able to experience the sustaining happiness, it means you got to be brave. It's recognizing that true contentment is 100% and entirely dependent on a relationship with Jesus. It is looking that resistance in the eye and saying, you're not going to have any hold over me. You're not going to have any hold over my family. Now, I lived for a few years, just in recent years, with my happiness completely dependent on my circumstances as a mom. I had a very dysregulated 3-year-old and then a 4-year-old and then a 5-year-old. So it was like a few years in a row. And I remember crying a ton. I mean, nearly every day for months. And I just would ask God, why? Why is this my life? And I would question his goodness. And I would feel so sorry for myself. And my resistance at that season of life was my dependence on myself and on what I could and could not control. And I had to eventually name it, and I had to choose to be brave so that I could fully experience that secret of being content. Now, brave, that word you hear a lot, right? And to be brave is having or showing a mental or this moral strength in the face of difficulty. Because again, we will always experience difficulty or resistance. Well, I took this word brave and I just broke it down into 5 points using each letter just because it sounded fun. So we're going to start number 1, the letter B. Be honest with yourself. Name that resistance. You know, for me, I'm not moving my body. For you, maybe you've lost a vision for your family. Maybe you can't get out of bed in the morning. Maybe you've got this debilitating fear about your child's future or well-being. Or maybe it's that you're trying to control your life instead of surrendering it to the Lord. So just name it. Sometimes we can be so haunted by it internally, and we're sitting in the yuck of what that opposition is, but to fully name it and say it out loud and speak it to existence, it loses its power. Number 2, R. Real talk with your people. All right? First, you got to know who your people are. So is it that your spouse? Is it your friend? Is it a sibling? Is it a neighbor, a coworker? Tell them about it. Tell them about the resistance. Once you have named it, you need to include somebody in on that. And the third thing, the letter A, is accountability. Who of those people that you name that resistance to, who's going to help you push back against it? When I was at my very lowest, I distinctly have this vivid memory that I'll probably never forget, where we're sitting on our couch in the basement and I looked at Paul and just started crying and said, I'm not okay. I need help. And what's funny is that Paul knows me better than anyone, right? He knew I was not okay. But I waited so long just to say it, just to let those words leave my lips. But once I did, I felt like it lost some power. And I was able to say, I need you to help me face this. Because I feel like I can't. I've tried everything on my own and I am failing and I need help. Number 4, V. Got 2 V's here for you. One is viable and visible plan. Have a viable and visible plan. The reason I say viable is because you need a plan that's going to succeed. You need one that's not, all right, I'm going to be doing the 100-miler in October. No, if you're 7 weeks out, you got to stick something that's doable, something that you're going to be able to accomplish. A visible plan. Put it somewhere where you can see it, somewhere where you're going to see it often, and then communicate that plan. And number 5, the letter E, envision a bigger story. As a woman, you have to envision a bigger story for yourself to get where you want to be. Maybe it's that you want to be healthier, you want a more disciplined life, you want to start that small business. And as a mom, you have to envision a bigger story for your family to get where you want to be. Maybe you want to say, I want to leave this legacy for my kids, or I want my family to live more generously, or I want my kiddo to have access to services to help them succeed. In Philippians, Paul modeled something so powerful for us. He chose a brave path, even though there was resistance, and he learned this secret to living. He acknowledged, he championed that when our dependence is entirely on Jesus, that's when we will be fully content. And just like in running, you have to create a plan. You have to include it in that weekly rhythm. And to live that fully content life that we read about in Scripture, we have to face the resistance that stands between the lives we live and the lives we want to live. I mean, resistance is hard regardless, but choosing brave is hard, right? So which one gets you to where you want to be? My prayer for us as moms is that we would acknowledge the resistance and bravely push back so that we would experience contentment, this sustainable happiness that is only found in Jesus.